In the late 1980s, if you walked into any office in the world and looked at what was running on the computers, you would have seen software made by a handful of different companies, and almost none of it would have said Microsoft on it. The spreadsheet, the single most important piece of business software on earth at the time, was made by Lotus. The word processor, the thing every secretary and lawyer and manager lived inside of all day, was made by WordPerfect. All the other markets had their own kings, the databases, the presentation software, and the email clients. Each had its own titan, a company that had won its war and stood dominant, and Microsoft in each of those categories was losing. Its spreadsheet was second tier, its word processor was somewhat of a joke for its lack of features compared to the best on the market. And then over the course of about 10 years, every one of those mighty kings was dead. Their empires collapsed and Microsoft owned all of it, a monopoly so total that to this day, more than 30 years later, it has never been seriously challenged. Microsoft won all of it with a single strategic idea, a weapon none of its rivals could counter and none of them saw coming, and making better products had almost nothing to do with it. By the time the giants understood what was happening to them, the entire competition had been rendered irrelevant. This is the story of how Microsoft took a group of the most powerful software companies in the world and bundled them all to death. This is the story of the Office Wars. Our story begins at the end of the 1980s, with Microsoft in a genuinely weak position. While Microsoft dominated the operating system market, when it came to the applications that people actually used all day, Microsoft was getting beaten badly. In the spreadsheet market, the crown belonged to Lotus and its legendary program 123, the killer app so essential that people bought IBM PCs specifically to run it. Lotus 123 was so dominant that it was synonymous with business computing itself. In word processing, the king was WordPerfect, a program so beloved that it commanded something like half of the entire market, with a fanatically loyal base of users who knew its every keystroke by heart. Microsoft Word, by comparison, was clumsy and unpopular. In the presentation and database markets, other companies led. Microsoft had good individual products in some of these markets and weak ones in others. If the software industry had continued to compete the way it always had, product against product, feature against feature, Microsoft might well have remained a permanent runner-up in applications forever, a company that owned the operating system while everyone else owned the things people did with it. But in 1989, someone on Microsoft's marketing team had an idea that would change the software industry forever. The insight was almost embarrassingly simple. Instead of selling Word, Excel, and PowerPoint as separate products, each fighting its own losing battle against a stronger rival, what if all of them were put in one box, sold together as a single bundle, and priced so attractively that buying it made overwhelming financial sense? Microsoft used this realization and started with its Macintosh applications, packaging Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and its mail program together, calling the collection Microsoft Office, and put it on sale. At the time, Microsoft Word on its own carried a list price of around $495, but the entire Microsoft Office bundle launched at a retail price of around $895. Taste, features, and brand loyalty all became secondary thoughts, with the arithmetic being the primary. Even if you believed correctly that WordPerfect was the better word processor than Word and that Lotus 123 was a better spreadsheet than Excel, you would have to buy each of them separately at full price, spending far more money to assemble a worse integrated collection of programs from different companies. Microsoft had found a way to make being the best in any single category almost worthless. It had stopped competing spreadsheet against spreadsheet and word processor against word processor. It was now selling an entire office against a single application, and no single application, however good, could compete with an entire office at the same price. Lotus made a spreadsheet. That was its expertise. It did not have a great word processor or a great presentation program or a great email client. WordPerfect made a word processor. It did not make a spreadsheet at all. Each of these companies was brilliant at its one thing and absent in every other market, and the bundle turned their specialization from a strength into a fatal weakness. To survive, each of them suddenly needed a complete suite of its own, and almost none of them had that. They now had to acquire or build at desperate speed all the things they had never made and stitch them together into a coherent package, while Microsoft, which had quietly sleep in building competent versions of everything simply tightened its grip. And so began one of the most frantic and doomed scrambles in business history, as the titans of the software industry tried to assemble suites out of whatever pieces they could grab. Lotus moved first and most sensibly, building Lotus Smart Suite by combining its 123 spreadsheet with ME Pro, its word processor, and Approach, its database. It also included its organizer calendar and a presentation program, and it sold the whole bundle at a price significantly below Microsoft Office. On paper, it should have worked, but there was a problem beneath the surface, and it was a problem that would doom every one of these counter suites. Microsoft's applications, over time, were engineered to genuinely work together, to share code and behave consistently and integrate as one seamless product because they all had been built by one company toward one plan. The rival suites were collections of programs from different origins, bolted together with different menus and different logic and awkward seams where the pieces met. They were suites in name and in packaging only. Underneath, they remained separate programs that happened to share a box, and customers, especially the corporate buyers who purchase software by the thousands of seats, could feel the difference. The scramble produced some genuinely strange alliances, born of pure desperation. WordPerfect could not build a suite alone, so in 1993, it entered into a partnership with Borland to create something marketed as Borland Office, combining WordPerfect's word processor with Borland's Quattro Pro spreadsheet and Paradox database. Think about what this alliance represented. These were two of the proudest, most successful software companies of the era. WordPerfect, the king of word processing, and Borland, an empire built on developer tools, and all of a sudden the two giants were lashing their products together like survivors building a raft, because neither could face Microsoft's bundle alone, and it still was not enough. The alliance was awkward, the integration was weak. Soon afterward, the whole tangle got messier still, as Novell, the networking giant, bought WordPerfect outright in a doomed attempt to build a suite of its own, only to find that it too could not make the pieces work together, and would end up selling WordPerfect off again a couple of years later at a catastrophic loss. Each of Microsoft's failing competitors failed to understand why Microsoft was winning, because it ran deeper than selling bundled software at a cut price. Microsoft's biggest advantage was that it owned Windows. It controlled the operating system that every one of those programs had to run on, which meant its own applications could be tuned to work with Windows better than anyone else's. It could take advantage of the platform in ways outsiders could not match, and most importantly, its bundle could be sold and promoted alongside the operating system itself. When a company bought new computers, those computers ran Windows, and Microsoft was right there offering the complete Office suite that ran perfectly on the operating system. It also sold them at a price no assembled collection of rival products could beat. The specialists were fighting a company that owned the very ground they were standing on. But the most serious challenge to Microsoft Office did not come from any of these desperate alliances. It came from the one company on earth with deep enough pockets and enough institutional muscle to genuinely go to war. In the middle of 1995, IBM acquired Lotus Development Corporation for approximately $3.5 billion. IBM's main prize was Lotus Notes, but the acquisition came with something else attached, and that something else was Smart Suite. In mid-July of 1995, IBM announced that Smart Suite would become its primary desktop software offering in the United States. Think about what that meant. IBM was attempting to sell its own computers as well as its own software. As one of the largest personal computer manufacturers in the world, it could put Smart Suite onto the machines it shipped, in the box, ready to go, reaching millions of customers without ever competing for a retail shelf. And IBM was already pushing its own operating system, OS/2, as an alternative to Windows. So here at last was a challenger with everything the others had liked: a complete suite, an enormous corporate customer base, its own hardware, and a balance sheet big enough to absorb years of losses. If anybody was going to break Microsoft's grip on the Office suite, it was IBM, and Microsoft understood that perfectly. perfectly, because Microsoft had one final weapon, and it had nothing to do with software. Every one of those PC manufacturers, IBM included, needed a license to put Windows on the computers they sold, and Microsoft decided who got that license, on what terms and when, and Microsoft was intent on using this leverage. IBM had opened negotiations for a Windows 95 license in late March of 1995, and for the first 2 months those talks moved along smoothly and at a normal pace. Then IBM announced it was buying Lotus, and everything changed. Microsoft's negotiators began cancelling meetings, failing to return phone calls, and sitting on marked up drafts of the license agreement. And in August, roughly 3 weeks before Windows 95 was due to launch, a Microsoft executive made an offer. Microsoft would settle an outstanding royalty dispute with IBM worth many millions of dollars on one condition: that IBM agreed to stop shipping SmartSuite for 6 months. IBM refused, and so Microsoft did not simply give IBM its license until IBM finally received its Windows 95 OEM rights 15 minutes before Windows 95 went on sale to the public on the 24th of August 1995. Meanwhile, Compaq, Hewlett-Packard, and other manufacturers who had been more accommodating sold machines with Windows 95 installed from day one, riding the single biggest software launch in history. IBM was left selling machines without the operating system everyone wanted, missing the back-to-school season entirely. A federal judge would later find that because IBM had marketed SmartSuite and other alternatives to Microsoft's products, Microsoft had unfairly punished IBM with higher prices, a late license for Windows 95, and the withholding of technical and marketing support. A decade after the fact, Microsoft would pay IBM $850 million to settle the matter. After that, the collapse of the rest of the industry was simply a matter of time. SmartSuite limped on for years under IBM before being withdrawn entirely, with the flat announcement that there would be no replacement for the suite. WordPerfect, which had once owned half the word processing market and inspired a devotion among its users that bordered on religion, was crushed by Word and passed from owner to owner at ever lower prices, ending up at Corel as a niche product for a loyal remnant. By the end of 1998, there was no meaningful market competitors left. There was only Office. An entire generation of category-defining companies, each of which had genuinely won its own war in its own market, had been wiped out inside a decade, and not one of them was beaten on the quality of its product. Every one of Microsoft's rivals was a specialist. Microsoft sidestepped those strengths entirely and changed the game beneath them, from a contest of individual products to a contest of bundles. And in that new game, brilliance in a single category became a single point of failure. More than 30 years later, that box is still winning. Microsoft Office, now Microsoft 365, is used by well over 1 billion people. It survived free alternatives, the shift to the web, and the move to subscriptions. So the next time you open a spreadsheet or a document or a slideshow and it all sits together neatly inside one familiar suite from one single company, remember that you are looking at the spoils of a war Microsoft won with a better idea about how software should be sold, while everyone else was still busy perfecting the software itself. Thank you for watching.